The showplace of the Maritimes, the Black Knight Lounge, is pleased to present for your entertainment the following gentlemen. From Dublin, Fergus O'Byrne and Dermot O'Reilly. From Tipperary, Dennis Ryan. They are Ryan's Fancy.
These guys are from Ireland, and they're doing our own songs from the East Coast with a vitality and a passion that we had never heard before. So it was like they sanctified our tradition.
They're almost our own, even though they're Irish, they're our cousins.
That band had not only a reputation in Atlantic Canada, that band had a reputation throughout the whole country.
In 1971, 3 Irish immigrants and their newly formed band found themselves in St. John's, Newfoundland. Little did they know that they would soon become household names. Over 12 years and 12 albums, the popularity of Ryan's Fancy would soar as they became stars of stage and television. They became adopted sons of Newfoundland, playing everywhere from pubs to village halls to auditoriums, and playing to everyone from convicted criminals to dignitaries.
So here's Fergus to help us along the way with the rocky road to Dublin.
The girl that tunes so sad and broken heart, I saluted father dear, I kissed me darling mother, drank a pint of beer, me grief and tears to smother the knot.
The 3 members of Ryan's Fancy never met until they came to Canada. They all came to the country in the 60s for different reasons. The youngest member was Fergus O'Byrne from Dublin.
In 1966, my father was 51 and he had 6 children. And he decided he wanted to emigrate. He was always talking about moving. I remember as a young child. So he left 6 months ahead of my mother and went to America and ended up in Detroit. I went over a year later. I went over in August 1967 I came. But rather than going to the States, because the Vietnam War was on, so I decided to move to Toronto where we had some friends. So I stayed in Toronto. And I was working in an office there, playing music, and the usual thing, and of course all the Irish parties, there was always music, there was always people singing. One of them was Ralph Thornbury, who goes by Ralph O'Brien. There was a fellow by the name of Gary Kavanagh, and there was a fellow from Wales, Benji was his name. But then eventually Dermot O'Reilly showed up. Myself and Dermot in particular gelled musically. It just developed from there then, and Dermot came in with the band, and we called ourselves the Sons of Erin.
Ah, the winter it is past, and the summer's come at last.
Anne O'Reilly, Dermot's wife, recalls how they came to settle in Canada.
Initially we were going to go to New Zealand. We were tape sponding with people in New Zealand, and a sister of mine and her husband came to Toronto. Instead of writing letters, we would send cassette tapes back and forth. My sister said, tape sponded anyhow, and she said, why wouldn't you come to Canada? So we thought about it and we just decided. We were young and it was an adventure. I heard of Ralph O'Brien, Fergus O'Byrne, Gary Kavanagh with the Sons of Erin. And how soon I met them was maybe 3 days after I arrived in Toronto. Dermot came in. I was seeing Dermot for the first time in 9 months. And he came in about 4 o'clock in the morning into the apartment. And he said that the guys were coming for supper. I was in the kitchen and people were saying, calling, Fred, Fred, Fred. And I called Dermot in and I said, Dermot, which of them is Fred? And he said, they call me Fred. I felt bad because I couldn't remember which of them was Fred that I'd been introduced to. And he said, no, they call me Fred. So that was my introduction, 3 days after I came to Canada.
And dashes through the ivy bridge in dear old Newport town.
After Dermot and Fergus left, a native of Newport, County Tipperary, joined the Sons of Erin. Dennis Ryan also happens to be my uncle, and in his home in Halifax, Nova Scotia, he has shown me memorabilia of when music became a central part of his life.
But that photograph up there is me 19, that's the first night I had a drink, Anne McQueen and Tommy Makem. See it over there, look back there, look, see Makem. Yeah. That was 1963, Carrick-Lish, County Limerick. And so I went to Dublin anyway around that time. I got to know some, through the Tipperary crowd, and the Clare crowd in particular, some musicians, and we formed our own little group in Dublin. My wife was, 23, 24. She was pregnant, going to Belfast, through Drumcondra. She was reading out the paper. She said, oh, there's a group here called the Irish Rebels, home from Canada. They're looking for a Girl Friday type of guy, a guy that could play the bit of music, could sing a song. I met the boys, got the job. So after about a week, the union walked in and the gig and said, you've got to be 6 months landed immigrant in Canada before you can be playing on stage. So I was never told that. Then I met a few guys that went to Newfoundland, the Sons of Erin, and I went away for 6 weeks. And then I joined Sullivan's Gypsies, Dermot Ferguson, myself, Gary Kavanagh, and Don Sullivan. I didn't particularly enjoy it. There was a bit of, the usual fighting and drinking and carrying on in the group. So I said, guys, I'm going to Newfoundland. I love the place. I'll go back, I'll get a job doing something. I'm going to put myself through university. So Dermot and Fergus said, we'll go with you.
I loved it. And the guy who picked me up at the airport with Dermot, Joe Sullivan, he said to Dermot, he said, this is Anne. And Dermot said, yes. He said, she'll never stay here. So many, many times after that, Joe would say when I'd see him, you fooled me. But when I arrived here, I felt I was home.
Oh yes, I must leave you, she gently replied, but just for a while or so.
Because it's Ryan's Fancy, everybody thinks it was Dennis Ryan's band kind of thing. But what happened was that when we were with Sullivan's Gypsies, Dennis had written a tune called Ryan's Fancy, which we recorded. And we were sitting in an agent's office in Toronto. Whoever, I'm not sure who came up with it, but said, well, how about Ryan's Fancy? I think our first gig was probably the Black Knight Lounge in Halifax. We left Toronto and drove into Halifax and played Black Knight Lounge.
A college student would see that show in Halifax, and for Brooks Diamond it began a long association with the band as he went on to become their manager.
The boys were one of the first in town, basically, who played that kind of music. And certainly it was the first time I had heard really traditional Celtic music played by anybody, let alone people actually from Ireland. So I was hooked.
My name is Eric McEwen. I live in a bucolic sanctuary next to the ocean, next to the Northumberland Strait, 30 feet on a cliff. A group that had just formed, left Toronto and were heading for St. John's, Newfoundland, driving over there with all their gear in an ancient Volkswagen bus. And as they came up the second highest mountain in Cape Breton, Kelly's Mountain, they tuned in my radio show. So, geez, when they got to Sydney about an hour later, they drove right to the radio station, came right up to the studio where we were doing her live with the musicians, sat right in, 3 bearded lads, and sang along and won our hearts on the radio. Well, Dennis was an amazing singer, handsome. And then you had Dermot, who was a damn good songwriter. Fergus O'Byrne, geez, man, wicked player, banjo, and a great singer of sea shanties. And so the boys had a richness and a texture and an exuberance that I swear no one else in Canada had.
When we came to Newfoundland, and in fact even before we came to Newfoundland back in Toronto, we had heard some Newfoundland songs. It was just a natural progression to embrace Newfoundland music. It wasn't I don't think it was a pre-planned, determined sort of thing. Oh, well, we'll learn a few Newfoundland songs and that way we'll become popular down there. It was just a love of the song. I mean, the songs down here reminded me of the songs from Ireland and England in a way, and that in a major part I think was key to the band's success.
Hey, we'll rant and we'll roar like true Newfoundlanders. We'll rant and we'll roar on deck and below.
After the release of one of their first LPs, live at the Black Knight Lounge, they would learn quickly about how the music business worked.
I think the first one, live, was the worst one recording-wise. Out of tune, basic stereo 2-channel recording. That was the most successful one. That's the one we never got a cent out of. Some hangman took advantage of us there now. But we didn't care. It was, again, spreading the gospel, spreading the word, right? We had Brooks Diamond, our friend, who was going to university here, trying to get into the entertainment business himself. We're learning from him. He's learning from us. He was very helpful to us. He really was.
I organised a tour for them. It was over in Prince Edward Island. Prince Edward Island only has 100,000 people at that point in time over the entire island. And the towns are quite small and so on and so forth. So anyway, we got this tour going and realized quite early in that it was overly ambitious. It was Sunday afternoon, we were enjoying a beer, and Dennis said, so I think it's time we get settled up. And I actually had the money. I had no idea what we were going to do with this money. Anyway, Dennis said, how much money have you got in your pocket? And I told him, I think it was $1,000. He said, well, that's fine, I'll take that. I could actually feel the money in my pocket on my leg. I said, well, you can't take all of it because I need it to pay still bills. But the thing was, before we did that cut, Dennis said to me, okay, well, you must remember one thing. Out there, meaning out there in the living room, we're friends. In here, we're doing business. When we leave this room and go back out there, we're going to be friends again.
We'll rant and we'll roar like true Newfoundlanders. We'll rant and we'll roar on deck and below until we see far.
In St. John's in the 1970s, one venue soon became the place to see Ryan's Fancy. Fergus has brought me to where the Strand Lounge was.
This is the main door into the Avalon Mall. There were no clubs downtown. As you can see, where we drove along was so close to the university that it was, anybody staying in residence, it was an easy hike into the Strand. When the mall was where it is now, it's almost on the outskirts of the city in those days, back in the 70s. So a lot of people from what we call around the bay, out in the rural area, they'd come in here to shop. And of course, the women folk would go shopping, and all the men would come in for the matinee, because Ryan's Fancy always played a matinee on a Saturday afternoon, and then they'd show that night. And then the women folk would meet them for the last set, and then they'd all go home with their shopping. So this is where the Strand was here. Okay, so that's the upstairs, but the main place was here, where Bootlegger and, and Ricky's is a clothing shop. But there'd be lineups from here, all the way out to the door. People would have to come here at, 6 o'clock in the evening to get in for the 9 o'clock show. I travel a lot now around the province doing school presentations and stuff, and I meet a lot of teachers, my age or a little bit younger, and they always, as soon as I come in the door, oh yeah, we remember the Strand Lounge. And I've always sort of this joke with them. I say, nobody got their degree from the university, everybody got their degree from the Strand Lounge.
I don't know, Jesus, it was magic. 6 nights a week, we could go in there for 2 weeks, blocker every night. Solid, jam, solid. We did that probably for 6 or 7 or 8 years. And of course, Newfoundland is very special. It's such a rich place in history, and it was an independent state, and they joined Canada in 1949. But they had this incredible wealth of folk music, storytelling. Half the population of Newfoundland came from the south-eastern part of the country before the famine.
Little airs used to be lively, and certain part of the dance,
It didn't take Ryan's Fancy long to discover the rich heritage of the province and how closely linked it was to their home country. This recording from the 70s by broadcaster and historian Aidan O'Hara shows the similarities between the Irish and Newfoundland accents on the Cape Shore. After a chance meeting at RTE in Dublin, Dennis persuaded Aidan to move to Newfoundland.
Collectively, they certainly had an interest in roots, if you like, the roots of the music. They would have met people from the Cape Shore and around Newfoundland, and Newfoundlanders love their music and know how to entertain. By gosh, they know how to entertain. Oh, no, they weren't there by accident, and I think study of that whole thing was part of it.
Over here, Ryan's Fancy. My name's Tommy Makem. We have a lovely guest for you tonight from way up in the northwest corner of Ireland.
The college life that Ryan's Fancy had started at Memorial University was put to the side as the band's profile increased. Alongside Tommy Makem, they made their first foray into television.
They said, you know what, we'd like Ryan's Fancy to have a television show, we're going to do a pilot, we're going to do a live audience. We don't think you're strong enough. So I was talking about Pete Seeger. So you can't get Pete Seeger, he's McCarthy era in the States, he's not allowed into Canada, he'll never be allowed back into the States. Maybe you get Buffy St. Marie or somebody like that. And even Joni Mitchell was taken off then. But I said, how about Tommy Makem? Here's a guy that I was in awe of, who I totally respected and admired. He was a tremendous fella to work with. And what we do is, we did 26 shows in Hamilton, Ontario, syndicated across Canada. RTE bought a series. In those days, Aer Lingus flew into Montreal. So the guests, Chieftain's first concert ever in Canada was on the Ryan's Fancy Show after doing the movie Barry Lyndon. Remember Paddy Riley, Al O'Donnell, Trina Ní Donal, Leon Rowsome, the piper. Got some great musicians.
In 1973, Jack Kellum had recently moved from Toronto to Newfoundland. He would become instrumental in the career of the band as the producer and director of the new Ryan's Fancy TV series.
I was first introduced to Ryan's Fancy at a reception that was being held at the Canadian Legion Hall in St. John's, Newfoundland. I had seen Ryan's Fancy on television shows like Sing Along Jubilee and the Tommy Hunter Show, which were national television shows. And it sort of puzzled me, you know. Here are these three Irish guys billed as being from Newfoundland, appearing on national network television shows. I didn't think too much more of it. One of the challenges that was thrown at me was to get a national network television series on the air as quickly as possible. And, I heard the guys that night, and, they were very, very good. And their rapport with the audience was amazing. I believe it was Dennis. Maybe it was everybody, but I certainly recall Dennis and myself having a meeting. We had a lot of things in common, and we hit it off. We, mutually came up with the idea that the shows should all be thematic. If the theme of the show was Songs of the Lumberwoods, then we would go and we would find a guest whose life and heritage was woven around the Lumberwoods. Now, he could be a storyteller, he could be a traditional singer. The first series that we did in 1974, we didn't have the budget to go to the guest. We had to bring the guest into the studio. The shows were quite successful, but I said, hey, why force this environment on these guests? Why don't we go to the guests? They would be more comfortable than in that foreign studio environment. We couldn't afford to travel that far, but I believe in 75 we did 6 or 7 episodes of the series where we actually traveled on location.
He had a great knack working with old-timers that weren't professional story. They were great. They were phenomenal people, but they'd never seen a camera before or worked in front. And Jack was very patient with him.
We were basically looked like hippies, and television at that time was populated with people in suits and ties and short hair. And as part of our career, we did the television shows, but also, say for example, we were somewhere in Newfoundland or somewhere in Cape Breton. We knew we were going to be around for a week, say, in the one area. We would set up a concert whereby, it would also give the opportunity for the film crew to get some extra footage, but also it was an extra gig for us. So it was just like any band that sees opportunities arise. One of the big things we did here in the province, for example, was we did a beer ad, India Beer. And that was the most requested song we had for about 2 years. People would come in, they want to hear the India Beer song. They didn't want to hear Dark Island or Newport Town. They wanted to hear the song, India, India, India Beer, India, that's the brew. And I can't remember the rest of it.
Slàinte, boys. Slàinte. That's a great point. Well, that's something that hasn't changed. No.
So they were not broadcasters, and that's what I was asking of them. I wanted them to be fully integrated into the production and to take their roles in it. And obviously, Dennis is a very gregarious human being, and so Dennis was an absolute natural. Dermot fell into it quite nicely. Fergus really had to work at it, but he did really, really well.
And again, because of their personalities, because Newfoundlanders are so taken with music, be they of West Country English origin or Irish, they just had the same entree into these communities. They were musicians, they were affable, friendly, and they got along. They were very relaxed at what they did. They did it very well.
We're now in County Mayo in the west of Ireland, and it's a beautiful part of the country. Not far from here in Connemara, in one of the Gaeltacht areas.
Where I lived, we only received one channel. We had no antenna. We lived under a hill. So what came on CBC, we watched. I remember this show very vividly. They were very charismatic guys, and they were singing songs that I'd heard in my own house, but doing it with a layer of professionalism that I wasn't used to. You know, they had all this energy and gusto that came across even on, you know, our little black and white TV.
The success of the television series was in that it could attract audiences of all ages. For Bob Hallett, from the band Great Big Sea, it was a regular fixture in his house as a child.
Dermot in particular had a way of making people like him right off the bat, you know, so because of that, the stories were very interesting and the conversations were very interesting. And, you know, we look forward to watching it. You know, the whole family would sit down together and watch this because, first of all, it was about Newfoundland, which we didn't see very much in media, and second of all, it was very, very good.
You know, we're taking these traditional sailors or rum runners or whatever they were, fishermen, telling their own songs. We did a show one time, geez, Jack, in a maximum security penitentiary for a week. We were there with, you know, convicted murderers, etc., put away for life. We sang prison songs, and some of these guys were good writers, right? So some experience, all that stuff. We were lucky to have it, you know.
We had various help along the way, in particular Alistair McGilvery, who was a major player in the band for a long time. He was a guitar player and arranger. When the television show started, we wanted somebody who had good musical sense, a good guitar player, and had a good musical arrangement ideas that would blend with ours. So he was hired on. So then he started touring on the road with us as a backup. He never sort of fronted. But Alistair was such a great guitar player, and he had a certain following in Nova Scotia that people were aware of him, and all in all, he was a major part of the band during his career with us.
From Cape Breton, Alistair McGilvery spent a large portion of the 70s working with Ryan's Fancy.
I was doing a show with them in Sydney Mines. I had never worked with them before. I just did a couple of opening songs. We then partied immediately after that concert. Really struck up a good friendship. We had a lot of common interests, and within a year of that, they had recorded a song of mine as a title song of one of their albums. It was called Looking Back, I Was to Blame. They asked me could I play a little bit of guitar on that particular album. I was playing gut string guitar at the time, and they said I sounded like Ronnie Drew.
When I fought for my pride, felt mistreated, but looking back I was to blame.
When I saw them first, I thought about how many bases they had covered. I saw Fergus as this great traditional singer, loved the old records, and I was the same way. You know, he and I had a lot of common that way, and we eventually roomed together when we traveled. I saw in Dermot, he had a contemporary sort of lean to his music, and he liked kind of rock and roll, very witty, a natural comedian. He was like triple jointed. He could make his body move like Charlie Chaplin, and he was a little harder to get to know. He had a sort of an introverted side himself, you know. A lot of the conversations he and I had were more serious off stage, you know. Dennis, I saw very much an organizer, loved instrumental music, loved the big songs, you know. He sang The West's Awake and all that. He had the big voice. He could bring the place down near the end of the night. But behind the scenes, great organizational skills, great interest in folklore, and I'd say that was all crucial to what Ryan's would eventually become.
When all beside a vigil keep, the West's asleep, the West's asleep. Alas and well.
Ryan's Fancy were also a prolific band in studio, releasing 12 albums during the course of their career.
The very, very first thing that we ever recorded was in Toronto, in fact. Because we were going to Newfoundland, and we really didn't know what was going to go on, obviously, but we wanted to just have a recording of what we were doing at the time. Then we did a live album at the Black Knight Lounge, and there was a studio called Audio Atlantic in Halifax. And to actually get a chance to record vinyl in those days, again, was a major sort of coup to have a record. We went in and did the album The Dark Island. And it was a whole learning process. And if you listen to The Dark Island compared to the last album we did. It was an album called Irish Love Songs, which we did in 1982. A prime difference is, I noticed, it was all about reverb in those days, and we figured, reverb would also, not only would it sound good, but also it would hide some of the flaws.
We'd finish a gig here in town, 2 o'clock in the morning, we'd go into the studio and work away for 4 or 5 hours. It never took us more than probably 16, 24 hours to do an album. Mixed, everything, done, gone. I didn't give a shite really too much making money from an album for recording. I wanted it as a sort of a promotional tool.
We spent more time on one album than we did all of the others, and that was the one that sold the least. That was looking back. We spent a lot of time doing that, and the production is great on it. The Newfoundland Drinking Songs, I think, is probably one of the biggest sellers of all the albums we did. And most of the songs in that are not Newfoundland.
Over Piper Stock Hill, take the time for to wander across the main bridge to the north side and yonder.
While they became renowned for their interpretations of Irish, English and Newfoundland songs that featured on those albums, they also wrote some of their own material, particularly Dermot O'Reilly.
Dermot did some of his own Children's Winter, Candlelight and Wine, West Country. These are songs he composed. He'd do the standard stuff like Nancy Whiskey or Curraghs Kildare. Dermot was one guy that could really have done anything in his own if he was confident enough, I'm sure. Or maybe he wasn't interested. Dermot, in many ways, was a very contented human being. 1977 or 78, we were invited to do a concert in Kansas City for St. Patrick's Day. And Dermot said he was taking a few days off. I said, where are you going? We're down in Kansas. He said, I'm going to Lubbock, Texas. He was a huge fan of Buddy Holly. So Dermot leaves Fergus and me. He spends the night with Buddy Holly's mother and father. He plays Buddy Holly's guitar for his mother and father. And I think Dermot went out to Buddy Holly's grave and buried his favourite pick in Buddy Holly's grave. That was the sort of a guy Dermot was. He did things different.
One of Dermot's great songs, Children's Winter. Children's name is and the chorus is snowman, hey, play with me. Anyway, he wrote it in the basement of my godmother's house.
Paul McNeill is driving me around Prince Edward Island and showing me where Dermot worked on the song at Children's Winter. Paul is the publisher of the Eastern Graphic newspaper, and his late father Jim was a good friend of the band.
Growing up, Ryan's Fancy was a massive bowl of excitement that would roll into the house once or twice or 3 times a year, and there was 3 burly guys with big beards and weird accents, and they just brought an energy into the place that was pretty interesting for a 6 or 8 year old. I think it probably was unique to have bands from off island come into play because back at that time in the late 60s, early 70s, it was not an easy province to necessarily get to or get around. And when they'd come to Montague and they'd roll in and they'd play the Lobster Shanty Pub, which had a seating capacity of maybe 150, 200 jammed to the rafters, and these guys would just be king of the hill for the night.
They were a band keen to visit small communities, something the Canadian ambassador to Ireland, like Ola Hearn, experienced in his hometown of Renews.
Our entertainment would be the local concerts. 2, 3, 4 times a year we would have a large concert, but it was all local stuff, and the same person you heard sing Christmas and St. Patrick's Day and at the garden party was singing on the concert. Still enjoyed it, and you paid your dollar or whatever. But when somebody like Ryan's Fancy that you saw on television, some of us got to know them, but a lot of people only knew them by seeing them on. And these guys, who play guitars and banjos and fiddles and played this so well, they're coming to our town. People came from miles around to see them. And, that's the kind of stuff that happened at home the night Ryan's Fancy came to town. People could probably tell you, the first night they came up, we had quite a time. When the show was over, they didn't get in their cars and go home. They went to somebody's house and continued the session. Yeah.
It was just the natural love of the music and wanting to be at it and the crack and stuff like that. So we would sing for hours after we were done playing.
You were traveling all the time, going anywhere from Winnipeg and all through central Canada and the East Coast. Did a lot of touring in the north. We played Bois Bush, and we played Churchill Falls, and we played the Pa, and then went beyond the tree line up to Tuktoyaktuk and Aklavik and Inuvik, and very, very interesting experiences for all of us, you know, getting involved with the native populations who always loved fiddle music, and Ryan's went over very, very well in those areas. But we never went through a down period where you sort of thought, you know, this thing is fading, we got to find something else to do. It seemed to be always booming, and they had a huge following. I think some of it had to do with the fact that they did party after every gig, you know, so people got to know them intimately. Sometimes people wouldn't bother to go to the live concerts we were doing, knowing that we were going to party till 5 in the morning, a couple of hours after the performance. So every place we did, we pretty well did that. You know, you needed incredible endurance to do it. But I think that was a great grassroots idea to get the people to know you and love you on an intimate level, you know.
The sailors used to have a great way of sort of getting through the day's work. They'd sing these songs called shanties. And we're going to do one for you now. It's called Little Sally Racket. Goes something like this. Here we go. Something like drop around and keep D-boys.
They were clearly most at home in the live world. They were incredible live, and in a thoroughly, totally natural way.
Holler away, now little Flo from Nana. Holler away, she slipped on a banana.
The concert hall, the brand new concert hall here in Halifax, and it still is our premier concert hall, is at the Dalhousie Arts Centre, the Rebecca Cohen Auditorium. It's a 1,000-seater. Up to the point in time that we decided to make the big jump from a 100-odd seat club to the Rebecca Cohen, nobody from the East Coast had ever played there, had ever soloed there as a headliner. So it was a big psychological move, and we sold it out.
One of the major shows that we were involved in was the time when Reagan came to visit Canada while Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau was there, and we were asked to represent the Atlantic region. So we performed in the National Theatre in Ottawa. As soon as the show was done and we all took our bow, we were immediately sort of all railroaded, and we had to run this corridor, run that corridor to be in the receiving line for when Reagan and Trudeau came down and shook everybody's hand. And there's actually a picture of Dennis shaking Reagan, you know, shaking hands with President Reagan. For several years, about 4 or 5 years, we went back to Ireland and toured, primarily in the West Coast.
One of the venues that always stood out for Dennis in Ireland was Katie Daly's in Ballina, Tipperary.
Just, there was one night there, the Furies and ourselves, and Marianne Faithfull was there. But that was a fantastic place. All the big groups would play at Katie Daly's in those days. And Kieran Early, I remember we were in town, I had a few days off, and he came up to my mother and says, "Oh God, would you ever could they do me one more night, right? But you're in your local community, you know, I know half the audience, for God's sake, are people that grew up with me." And here's this asshole home from America, sell out all these people lined up down the road trying to get in, you know. "Who do you think you are, Ryan? Jesus, you've come a long way. I know you hear nothing." Fellas are saying, "I'm with the band." Jeez, get me in. I sneaked the odd guy around the back door, right?
They go down with the nets to the shore.
They offered me a full-time membership in the group, which I thought was very generous. You know, we obviously had gotten to a point where we were on common musical ground and common social ground, got on very, very well. But I always felt I should be a backup musician, and I also felt I would be a little more restless than them, maybe thinking that somewhere down the line I would get into other things, which eventually I did. At that time, James Keane was interested in working with him. He was a great accordion player living in New York at the time. So, you know, he was able to move in a spot that I was opening up.
So I said, "Boys, you know, I was getting bored in the group. There's the three of us. I always loved James' accordion. Christ, I got him at the right time." He said, "Sure, I'd love to." I think thanks to James in many ways that we kept the group going for another 2 or 3 or 4 years. Great fun to travel with, big 6'4" James, tremendous box player, great storyteller, just great fun to be around. Himself and Dermot are two rogues, I'm telling you.
We are proud of the fact that Puckane will be appearing on television screens throughout the world. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Puckane tonight, and a special welcome home to our own Ryan's Fancy.
We actually went back to Ireland and did a special called Homeboys Home. We did some work in Dublin, and we also did a fair bit of work down around Tipperary, and did a major show out of Puckane, did a big show in a pub in Puckane.
I remember coming through Limerick one night, 79 or 80, about 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't know where we were coming from. And there was Roach's Stores, and there was 2 policemen just on duty late at night or early morning, and we had the windows open. There was the accordion and the guitar, James Keane and Ferguson the Boron and Dermot on the guitar, just playing jigs and playing tunes coming through Limerick at 4 o'clock in the morning. Got it. And they were the loveliest fellas to travel with. Oh my God. Once we get into our 30s, mid-30s, that I think we're losing the energy then for that stuff. I was anyway, for sure.
You know, had we explored, I'm sure we could have reinvented the whole thing, but I think there was a point where people were just getting weary of travelling. You know, we all wanted to just see where we were going.
We talked about it. It was 1982. We were driving from Calgary to Banff in the Rockies. We sort of said it a year before, on and off, boys, we got to do something else. We're getting old. We've got to get out of this racket, right? And we put the date of the last day of June 1983 was our last day. And we got some big gigs after that. We turned them all down. We actually got a big gig to do with the symphony on July the 1st, an outdoor concert in Halifax. The boys said, no, we gave her the last day of June is the date and that's it. I don't know whether we're getting tired of each other. I don't think that was it. It's such demanding. Look, we were together for 12 years. Holy God.
They were a rare example of people stopping while they're ahead. But knowing the kind of effort they put into the work, they did a lot of work, if you could call having a party work, and it is really, if you're doing it often. They did that because the fans wanted that. They really expected it, and it was part of their ingredient of really making friends and making connections with people.
The sun was setting in the west, and the birds were singing in every tree.
After Ryan's Fancy called it a day in 1983, the 3 core members went their separate ways. Dennis entered the financial world, Dermot set up a recording studio, and Fergus mixed being an educator and a musician. Fergus and Dermot would eventually start performing together regularly again, and there were always hopes on the East Coast that the trio would get back together.
I had always hoped that they would do a reunion. One of the early shows that we did was with an old fiddler called Rufus Ginchard. So in 1990, he celebrated his 90th birthday. Al Pittman and I actually wanted to do a big 90th birthday party for Rufus. And I had hoped that this would be the occasion that we would do a reunion. Dermot wouldn't have anything to do with it.
We had been approached several times to do reunion stuff, but I wasn't in the cards. Dermot wasn't that keen on doing that, revisiting that road. I would have done it because more than Dermot, I was a touring musician at the time. I'm not sure if Dennis would have done it or not. He probably would have, but Dermot really wasn't that keen on revisiting that aspect of his musical career. And that was fair game.
No, I can't do that. We did, yeah. We got one very big offer. That's probably 10 years ago. I out of courtesy, I called the boys, but no, you can't. I just, you know what? Somebody said, why don't you and Fergus around? Why don't you bring back Ryan's Fancy for a little concert? You can't do that. That's finished and over and done with. Once you close the chapter, it's never the same again. Never, never, never.
It may be over 30 years since they disbanded, but Ryan's Fancy are still influencing a new generation of musicians. At his home in St. John's, Fergus O'Byrne is playing music with his son, also called Fergus, in their front room. Fergus admits that he wasn't always aware of the impact of his father's band when growing up in the city.
That, I guess, has been more of a gradual process over time as different events, CD releases, discussions about Dermot, etc., and just meeting people over the years. At first it was kind of, I didn't quite understand it because all these people were like, your dad's amazing, and I was like, okay, that's cool, I think he's pretty good too. But then over time, and especially hearing some of the band and then getting involved and just seeing what kind of transpired, brought the picture a bit bigger.
There have been many, many groups in Atlantic Canada that accredit their beginnings to the influence of Ryan's Fancy. You know, the Irish Descendants, Great Big Sea, and Great Big Sea, you know, it might not be a household name in Ireland, but it's a huge name in North America. They actually recorded their first album in Dermot's recording studio.
For Bob Hallett, it was a no-brainer that his band Great Big Sea were on hand to present the Lifetime Achievement Award at the East Coast Music Awards in 2004.
Because they were such an influence on us, but also because they became such good friends to us, you know. Because we got to be buddies and we got to collaborate together and have a pint together. And the thing about the ECMAs and the Canadian music business is when Ryan's Fancy were playing, folk music was on the fringes, you know, and traditional music had become something done in church basements, or kids were made to learn it on a Sunday morning. And whereas we've been lucky enough to have a career when it was in the centre of mainstream pop music in Canada, you know, there's a bit of a sadness and a bit of regret and a little bit of melancholy for these guys. They'd made such amazing music, but it had never really gotten a chance to be heard by as many people as it could have or should have.
The first question was, well, is the band going to perform? And I said, I don't think so. You know, we're not going to get together and do a performance for the show. I approached Brooks Diamond and the producer of the show and said, look, why don't we do it this way? We won't tell anybody. When we get the award, we'll sing a verse or a chorus of the song, just like it was sort of off the cuff.
Hello, my bunny wee girl.
Oh yeah, I sort of cried that night. I mean, we got a standing ovation of 12,000 people. I'll never forget it. One of our finishing songs used to be the chorus of the Tyree love song with 3-part harmony in it. And we did it, and Jesus, it was, I've met people since to talk about it.
Well, I meant to call you just before I left to go away, but I guess you knew that's what I'd say by now.
Just 3 years later, one of the three would pass away. Dermot O'Reilly was 64 when he died.
We had a steady gig in O'Reilly's week after week whenever I was in town, and that was the beauty of that whole arrangement. If I wasn't in town, Dermot would do the gig on his own. I had gotten a call from the Rankin family who were touring Canada, and they were doing a show at the stadium. You know, I knew them from Raylene, and she said, look, we're in town on Thursday night of next week. Any chance that yourself and Dermot would come and do the show with us? So we did that show, and then the Friday night we went to O'Reilly's, did the show again. The gig was finished at about 12:30, so myself and Dermot and a couple of buddies, we stayed around for a pint. And I said goodbye to Dermot 1:30 in the morning, and next morning I got a call from his doctor saying he died overnight. I had a heart attack, and so I mean, and Anne, his wife, was away, so we here at the house were the next point of call for any emergency.
I got a call from Fergus, who was crying at the other end. Dermot had passed away. It was a Saturday morning. It was a shock. I knew he had a few problems heart-wise, and he went his way. Look, Dermot was so good to everybody. My God, he was so good. He could call me at 4 o'clock in the morning, and there was the thing that Paul McCartney used to say, oh, Belle, who's that knocking at the door? That song that the Beatles did. We could never figure out what it meant. And, oh, Belle. And Dermot used to call me and say, oh, Belle, is that you? Oh, he was some funny boy. He was some funny.
Oh, Isle of my childhood, I'm dreaming of thee. As the steamer
Ryan's Fancy are still remembered fondly in St. John's. In more recent years, some of their music has finally made it to CD. It's proved to be a big seller in shops such as O'Brien's, run by Gordon O'Brien, who remembers them coming to the shop in their heyday.
They were our top sellers in the late 70s, and they still sell. Their 40th anniversary, they would have been, so it's a 2 CD set with 40 songs taken from their old LPs and cassette tapes.
It bumped Guns N' Roses out of the top-selling spot in the record stores in Newfoundland. I mean, that's just mind-blowing to anyone outside of sort of the Newfoundland area or the East Coast area, but that shows sort of the connection that this band had. I mean, this was 25 years after they exited the stage. That band stands up with any band you will ever find singing Celtic music. They were just that good. Their sound was so unique. And you had 3 unique characters who all brought different strengths. That it really is a band that just stands the test of time.
It's not only that they brought Irish music here, and we had all kinds of it, but they certainly helped us appreciate our own music again.
They were the real deal. They were the Dubliners of Canada's East Coast, and we cherished them in every village and hamlet and city and town on Canada's East Coast.
They jump-started the interest in Celtic music here on the East Coast. They really lit the fire.
Don't sort of leaf through all the write-ups and say, oh, what a wonderful band we were. I look at it as a body of work that's still there, that still can be produced and still should be there.
It was great fun. 70s were a spectacular era, I don't care, for us anyway. And we just hit it at the right time.
Then fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all.